Welcome to episode 627 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and after the victories against Bayern Munich and Real Madrid last week, and then expounding upon that with my conversation with Alex Dalmas earlier in this week, I've been really thinking about those terms that seem to be overused quite a bit, in tiki-taka and Barça DNA and the Barca way. As I said with Alex last episode, I just keep coming back to this idea that maybe I need to admit that I don't really know that much. Like, I know things, but I don't truly know how to conceptualize this into one easy to espout on social media way of thinking about how Barcelona play. The things that I think we know is that the Barca way is verticality, it's organized pressure, it's positional play, but it's also none of those things when the right personnel isn't there. And yet for all those team concepts, it's also tremendous individual talent utilized through the team concept. Think Messi, Ronaldinho, and now Lamine Yamal. But so many of the best teams in the world can say that those qualities also define their teams and have now for decades. And that's the discussion on the first team. So instead of looking at just the first team, I think today we're going to be looking, yes, at the first team, but also using La Masia, as I think Culers can very accurately do, to discuss what is that Barca way and what Barca DNA is. Because there are some fundamental truths about when Barcelona is successful and the players that are coming out of La Masia. Barcelona have never been successful with midfielders who don't have a little bit of that pausa, who understand the tempo and pace of a game, who have the technical skills to get out of trouble, or to figure out the game with their passing in 180 degrees. Ironically enough, at the present time, Lamine Yamal and Pau Gasol are the two probably shiniest gems out of the academy recently, but when we talk about La Masia, we are really talking about midfielders. And today my deep dive is about that attacking midfield position that hasn't really existed for a while in Barcelona's system, but it does exist under Hansi Flick. And yet, even with Hansi Flick just arriving in the summer, the academy has almost an overwhelming number of players that might exactly fit in the coming years in Hansi Flick's system in that position. Today, we're not even talking about deep midfielders or ones that would be in that double pivot, but really just the attacking midfielders in the first team and down the levels. This is the kind of video that I don't normally make on the channel, so if you do want to see more of it, let me know in the comments below, or subscribe to the YouTube channel, or if you're listening on the podcast apps, you'll always appreciate it as well. Subscribing and giving a good rating on the apps also helps me out. This is the easiest way to help me, if not for the merch store, Patreon, or any of the other places in my community exist. So thank you so much. Let's get into talking all about that attacking midfielder spot at Barcelona. Last season, I said that Ilkay Gundogan was probably my man of the season. Maybe not the best player, maybe not the most important, but my player of the season. The way he was so integral to the way that Xavi played and the importance he had as a starter in basically any spot in that midfield where he was needed. Even at his more advanced age, he was a midfielder that was consistently available. And I was skeptical of him leaving. But with Hansi Flick arriving and the signing of Dani Olmo, it all started to make a lot more sense. At 34, it would have been a lot to ask of Gundogan to press with Lewandowski in that 4-2-3-1, especially when it's the most attacking midfielder that is needed to press highest when Lamine Yamal drops to defend in that 4-4-2 to support heavy overloads on the opponent's left side. It doesn't happen too often, but Fermin Lopez in the first half of Real Madrid did have to step forward quite a few times. Now, there were also reasons why Gundogan is no longer at Barcelona that have to do just with the club and with the player, that with the financial side of things and things that were happening not on the field. But I am, for the purpose of this video, just looking at that attacking midfielder spot from a Barcelona perspective and saying from just that context that I totally understand now what the vision might have been. Not only did Flick not necessarily need Gundogan, but there is almost too many candidates for just that one spot, both now and in the future part that we'll get to later. So to kick this off, I'm going to give you 14 names. Dani Olmo, Fermin Lopez, Pablo Torre, Rafinha, Pedri, Gavi, Unai Hernandez, Noah Darvich, Guy Hernandez, Kim Junyent, Juan Hernandez, Marcos Parriego, Ibrahim Tunkara, and Gorka Briel. Football changes quickly, but what I see is a lot of talent for an essential position in Hansi Flick's system. So let's go one by one through this list. Dani Olmo was 55 million euros this summer as a 26-year-old midfielder with both international and Champions League experience who grew up in Catalonia and spent time in La Masia. That sounds like a midfielder ready to return and contribute right away to Barcelona, at least on paper. So now's the time for me to say something absurdly controversial, because while I do really like Cesc Fabregas, I do, but when he returned to Barcelona in 2011 at the age of 24, it was not the triumphant homecoming that he or fans wanted. The midfield trio of Xavi, Iniesta, and Sergio Busquets were already immovable, and Thiago Alcantara was a young kid pushing for minutes, and we know how even that story ended. Since he couldn't be in the midfield, that being Fabregas, on a regular basis, maybe he could have had a free role like he had at Arsenal, sometimes playing a bit higher up the field. But there was already a player with a pretty free role in that attack named Lionel Messi. So long story short, the Fabregas return, very little being on the player himself, didn't go as planned. But Olmo could be what happens when the chosen son returns and it goes well. Yes, the often injured Olmo did already pick up a knock this season, but his 3 goals in 5 matches this year showed just how instantly comfortable he looked in this system. I do have high hopes for Olmo. For years, I worried about any attacking midfielder, Alan Halilovic, anyone, that came to Barcelona because there really wasn't a spot for them because of Messi. With Suarez, Messi, and especially when it was still Neymar up there, the midfielder had to both work hard and have some skill. It's so funny to me the way that younger fans may not remember the absolute disgust that so many had for Rakitic when Culers needed someone to blame for a bad result. But this is a different Barcelona now, one without the magic of Messi. Yes, but also one where magic may come from a number of different players, including that 10 spot that didn't really exist when Messi was around. And that's the good news for Olmo. It's not all on him. If this team fails to create from open play or is just struggling to get anything going and making high quality chances, Olmo really isn't going to be even the first name that's blamed for negative results. And even talking about the biggest results of the season so far, Olmo didn't even start in those games. Fermin Lopez did. And he is just 21 years old. I'll say that again. 21 years old for Fermin Lopez. Because don't forget that he, like the other young players around him, can still very much improve. And he is improving, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I talk extensively about how I kind of underrated how he's improved this season on the defensive side of the ball with Kevin Williams in that podcast in between Bayern and Real Madrid. He's a slightly different profile from Olmo, but he's a Barcelona first teamer that is in stone. What a luxury the team has to have a player like him. One that isn't needed as a consistent starter, one who seems to understand his role perfectly, but one that very well could take that starting spot if somebody else is out long term. Like Casado, I have already learned my lesson with Fermin Lopez. As I said, he's still 21. He can get even better. And really the only step now he can take, even at just 21 years old, is to become a written-in pen starter at FC Barcelona. That, yes, is very, very difficult, but it doesn't even have to happen this year. He gets on the field. 6 appearances and 187 minutes with 2 assists, while also having been injured for a few weeks. He is certainly in the plans long-term, especially after signing his renewal until 2029. He's going to be at least under the Barcelona umbrella for quite some time, or if he's sold in the next 2 years, it's going to be for a pretty big number. Which brings me to Pablo Torre, another first-teamer, another attacking midfielder, and another player who's 21 years old. He also has a ton of potential. He scored 3 goals and picked up an assist in 6 matches this season, playing just over 200 minutes. You can't ask much more of him in the times that he's featured this season. And yet, we worry about his future of the club because I don't think he'll find the minutes that he deserves with how high of a ceiling he has. He's also improving, and it's so interesting to reflect on how different of a player he is from Fermin Lopez. Pablo Torre could have a whole team revolving around him and defending for him. I mean, that's what it looked like when you'd watch Racing Santander 2 years ago. And I think that may be his future yet. No, not at Racing Santander, but with Giovanni, Lo Celso, and Isco both injured for Real Betis, there are teams in the Liga with European aspirations, like Girona was last season when they signed him on loan, that could give him a more prominent role. But again, for Barcelona to have a player like that on their bench this season is a luxury that few teams around world football have this year. To be able to plug and play a player that can score goals, can assist, and offensively just has the highest ceiling imaginable for a player who's 21. And with the return of Frankie de Jong and the emergence of Marc Casado, and that's not even to consider what the possible and hopeful return of Marc Bernal will mean next season, I don't know how Hansi Flick will get everybody minutes even this year. Due to injuries, Rafinha did play at that 10 spot already this season. I didn't mind that at all. But I do think Barca is better with him on the left wing, mostly because he is Barcelona's best option on the left wing. But what about Pedri and Gavi? De Jong flipped that game against Real Madrid when he entered for Fermin Lopez, and who went high? Pedri. Is it more essential in, we'll say, big matches to start Marc Casado instead of Dani Olmo? And if Dani Olmo isn't starting, then is that Pedri spot at the 10? And how does Gavi fit into that puzzle at all? Now, today I'm kind of taking the easy way out, and I'm just kind of listing attacking midfielders for you, because that question, as how do all his midfielders fit even this season under Hansi Flick, that's not the purpose of this video, and that is a bigger question that I think we'll continue to answer over the course of this year. My cop-out has continued to be that there are a ton of fixtures, and not all of these midfielders have the best injury history. Gavi is coming back from a long-term injury, so there are going to be minutes, and there are going to be moments for all of those, we'll say, big-name players that we'd expect to be starters. For the first time in a long time, and again, maybe I'm going back to Fabregas in 2011, this team finally has a lot of depth at midfielder and a lot of options that Hansi Flick can trust, which is a perfect transition into the positive and negatives down the pipeline. Because there are players that are talented enough, even at Barça Athletic, who could help a lot of teams in world football at the first team level, but there just isn't spots and minutes for them at present time in the first team. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because if somebody does go down, you know that you basically have a player that you can trust coming up from the second team. But in the same way, those players, of course, are going to get itchy when time doesn't come. And who knows if minutes will come in the next few seasons. The first name in this discussion, of course, is Unai Hernandez. He's currently captaining Barça Athletic and has 4 goals in 9 matches. So far this season, he's played 5 matches in the middle of the park and 4 on the left wing. He's gone anywhere he's been needed, and he's been essential to any sniff of a positive result that Albert Sanchez's team hopes to get, which haven't been too many this season. His best position is probably as that attacking midfielder, but it should be noted that Albert Sanchez plays a 4-3-3 with a more traditional pivot, and you're about to find out why. It's an interesting time for Unai Hernandez because he's still just 19, and he looks ready for the first team. So I do wonder when and if the call-ups do come for him this season. And if he's an attacking midfielder playing on the left wing, there's also an attacking midfielder playing on the right wing in Noah Darvich. He came last summer for 2.5 million euros as a pretty big prospect from Freiburg, though at the time he was still 16. After a start and stop season last year with Barça Athletic as a 17-year-old in a new country and a new system of playing, by the way, for the first time at the professional level, even if it is the third division in Spain, he remained at the club this year, didn't decide to go elsewhere, and the now 18-year-old has also had an interesting start to the season. He started 3 of the 7 games he's featured in, picking up his first 2 assists of the season last weekend in a start. For a player that is also probably best as a 10, he now plays on that right wing in that 4-3-3 because of the other options in midfield. A right wing spot that Tony Fernandes was getting time at before he got injured, and a spot that Aziz Issa, the new signing from Ghana who is about to be eligible, is also set to play and where he's probably most comfortable. And if all reports are to be believed, Ibrahim Diarra, another big prospect, this time from Mali, may be joining the club after his 18th birthday in January. Darvich really excels when the game goes vertical, and his passing, when he has time on the ball and can run at defenses, is where I really see him excelling at the highest level. I'm not predicting anybody's future here. I'm just reminding you that he is around and could be pushing for a spot, especially with a German coach. But there's a lot of competition already with teenage prospects at 17 and 18 years old playing right wing and midfielder, even at Barça Athletic. Because for as good as Unai Hernandez and Noah Darvich may be, they probably don't have the highest ceiling in that midfield at Barça Athletic at present time. That is a 16-year-old that you've heard me mention a number of times on the channel, on the podcast, in Guy Fernandez or Guillermo on the team sheet. He plays as a high interior midfielder for Barça Athletic, and because I've talked about him so extensively in the past, I won't really go into the details, but he is working on things down there in the third division, so there have been good moments and bad moments, but whether it's next season or the year after, he is going to be in the first team. Like Marc Bernal, if he stays on the path he's on, I don't see how he wouldn't be useful for that first team because his ceiling is just so high. He does everything in the game, the physicality, close control, the attacking flair he has, and that nose even for goal, and the ability to play a final ball. He has everything you'd want from an attacking midfielder, and he is still just 16. So yes, that continues to be the name that I tell you to circle on the future prospects that you haven't seen in the first team yet. And since I've already named 3 attacking midfield prospects, it does start to make things difficult when we talk about a player like Junyent. The player that Pau Cubarsí, I mean, they are 17-year-old friends, so there's a bit of bias, but he's the one that Cubarsí said is a player that Culers need to have their eye on in the academy. He already got off the bench for Barça Athletic for their opening game, and remember, he did do preseason with the first team. I have raved about him before, and every time I've seen him this year, the positivity continues. He might have the best close control in tight spaces of any player in the academy, including the ones I already mentioned. Whether on the left wing or in the middle, he's such an exciting player. And I'm talking like Pedri levels of ball retention with some more attacking flair. Now, he doesn't read the game anywhere near what Pedri does, or even what Pedri did at 16, because if he did, he'd already be in the first team, but they aren't really the same player at all. I'm just making the comparison of the ball retention. For some reason, I did put on some Carabao Cup earlier this week as background noise, and for the moments that my eyes did drift over, I looked at those games and said, Junyent would be playing for any of those big English sides in that competition. My only worry for him is that he's coming up just behind all those other players at his position. Sometimes the timing just doesn't work out for you, but he is still also just 17. And again, if he keeps getting better, He's playing with the U19s this season. It's hard for me to imagine that he is not good enough for a first team and Barcelona's first team in 2 years' time. And even if it's not Junyent, it could be Juan Hernandez, another 17-year-old, but one that is currently playing with Barça Athletic. He's also a natural attacking midfielder, which is the whole purpose of this video. He's made 5 appearances, mainly playing on the left wing, but I do think his future may lie as a forward at the top level, so maybe we're not talking about him as an attacking midfielder. But also, when I watch him, I don't know. Juan Hernandez is so interesting to me because he does so many things well, and I haven't really figured out where he fits and what his elite skills are at the top level, which is totally fine because he's still just 17 and refining every aspect of his game. Where he'll eventually wind up on the field will come down to both how he develops and where teams need him. He's still playing in UEFA Youth League this season alongside Junyent, so fortunately, just like Junyent, I get to say, hey, let's revisit this in a season or two. And the third player that is probably most naturally an attacking midfielder with the U19s is a new signing in Marcus Parriego, the 18-year-old attacking midfielder who just signed for Rayo Vallecano this offseason. Barca beat Real Madrid, his first big academy actually, and Man City for his signature, but it's still too early in his Barca tenure to make sweeping conclusions about it. But his signature does show you that the club isn't satisfied with all the attacking midfielders they already have. They want to continue to add gems to their war chest. And Parriego, while I think of the list that I've given you so far, is least likely to make the first team, you don't know because, again, he was a big prospect coming over from Rayo Vallecano. Speaking of the U19s and Barca Athletic, actually, Pedro Rodriguez is another 16-year-old midfielder that Culers, who do follow the academy, might have already been saying here, but very much like Gavi's position. Again, I'm not comparing him to Gavi, but very much like Gavi's position. I think his role at the top divisions is probably in a deeper spot than an attacking midfielder role. So that's why I'm not really putting him on this list. And really, at this point, the list should be done. But there was a time, I'll remind you, that I had to go down to the U16s, all the way down to the Cadet A, to get players who I thought had first-team potential. Check out some old La Masia profiles on BarcaBlog.com when I talked about a 15-year-old Alejandro Balde playing with Cadet A. Because after Juan Miranda, who was 19 years old at the time, Alejandro Balde at 15 was the next big prospect at left back for the club at the time. So while I do avoid covering 14 and 15-year-olds generally for the YouTube shorts that I've been doing where I do profile the La Masia players, if we're talking about potential attacking midfielders for the club, I do have to mention two 14-year-olds in Abrima Tunkara and Gorka Buil, the later of which arrived from Real Zaragoza this offseason. Because of Pau Barci and Lamine Yamal and even Guy Hernandez and Kim Junyent, being 14 means they're potentially 2 seasons away from even having a role with the first team. That's why I have to mention them here. And because they're 14 playing with the U16-year-olds, the reason I say their names is because, yes, they're very exciting, but I always tell you the ones to watch for in the academy are the ones that the club is pushing to new challenges and playing up the divisions. And having seen them, they already look like the 2 best players at the U16 level, especially when they really get on the ball and can drive it forward. Gorka is more of the one who can pick the pass. Ibrahima has a ton of finishing product already, and I'm not even sure where his best position might be. It might be maybe as a center forward, maybe on the wing, maybe as an attacking midfielder, maybe as a center midfielder. Again, being 14, it's great because the world is their oyster and they're so important to their sides, they can play in a lot of different positions. Now, usually I would wrap this up with some gloom and doom, telling you, hey, I named 14 players, and fortunately, yes, one of them is Rafinha, so we're not really talking about him as an attacking midfielder, but having named 14 players, some of those, and maybe half of them, will surely not make it into the first team. And that's probably true. But you know what? Because of Marc Casado and his recent breakout, and because of Fermin Lopez, I don't want to count my chickens of negativity before they hatch. I'm going to say that maybe each of these players may have a role, and if somebody's going to fit them into a system, it's going to be Hansi Flick. I can toot my own horn and say I'm not wrong about the academy very often, and I was slightly wrong about Marc Casado and his ability to transition to the first team. And so if I'm naming all these players that I'm seeing, I'm saying, hey, those are guys that I see in the first team down the road in 2 or 3 seasons because they have the potential that I didn't see in years past with the academy, with the U16s and the U18s and the U19s. There's just so many good, talented attacking midfielders, almost too many for the club at the moment. The one thing I do know is that attacking midfield spot, whether it's under Hansi Flick or a different coach, or even if a coach returns to playing 2 high interiors in a 4-3-3 with a traditional pivot, I can almost trust that Barcelona's attacking midfield spot, or that 10 position in the 4-2-3-1, is in good hands for a long time, regardless of what happens with the players at the first team level right now. And I think that trust in the midfield coming up from the academy, that in conclusion, if this is some kind of thesis paper, is what I would say is Barça DNA. This trust that midfielders are going to give you a certain level if they have high enough potential coming through the academy. And Barcelona do produce more midfielders than I feel like any other academy in world football. Even though, again, Lamine Yamal and Pau Gasol are the two players that are making all the headlines for the academy at the moment at first team level. This was something a little different than what I normally do, and I hope you had fun with it, so let me know if you did. Of course, it takes a little bit longer to make these and all the things that go into it, writing the scripts and getting all the information together and getting all the graphics and video and all those different things. But fortunately for you, we're right back to action on Sunday. It's 9:45 a.m. East Coast time for pregame on YouTube for the live stream, and then 10:15 a.m. East Coast time against Espanyol over on Big Up for that watch along. Please, please, please join me for both of those and subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss when I'm doing something especially like this. And as I already said, as low as $3. Thank you to my new Patreons as well who've been helping out with the recent success, as well as getting something from the merch store. Those are the most direct ways to help the show. And I didn't mention, but yes, this is the Barcelona podcast. So giving a good rating and sharing the podcast to even other Barcelona fans in your life, that truly is the easiest way to help me out. But as always, until next time, Forza Barça.